the Oblivion is a rather curious game within the world of darkness, because it turns out to be a lot of people's favourite game within the world of darkness, yes, even more so than Vampire the Masquerade, and yet it's a game that barely anybody will play and run, which is absolutely monkey bananas if you want my totally biased opinion. But if you are here, you are one of the truly based individuals that wants to try running and playing it with your friends or total strangers on the internet or in person, and here, your Lore Saviour, you're going to find all the juicy bits that you need to know in order to run what I believe is the subjectively, objectively best TTRPG of all time! Suck on that, D&D fans! So, what exactly is this going to entail? Well, I'm going to put together a short chronicle and run for a bunch of strangers, preferably those who have had no experience with Wraith the Oblivion, to show you lucky bastards, to show really how easy it is to run Wraith the Oblivion. We're going to go through step by step of how we're going to put the whole thing together, some night advice and tips, and a load of other goodies along the way, things that you can do in your games of Wraith the Oblivion, which I know that you're going to be running now, after this video, in this truly goated guide to running Wraith the Oblivion. So, what's the very first fucking step in all of this? I believe the absolute bare bones minimum thing that you should do first is work out who your players are and who's actually going to be running it, which may sound a little obvious, maybe too obvious, maybe insultingly obvious, but the number of times I see on Discord servers and Facebook posts, Reddits and all the rest of it, where you have people like 4 or 5 people saying, oh, I really want to play Wraith, but I can never find a game to play it with, or I have this story, but I can't ever find anybody, and they just totally miss all these other people in said post. It's like, you silly billies, you've got a group there making. If you want to make it work, find a time that works best for all of you. Like, it's not difficult, people. So once you've got your group together, you then need to decide what the story is going to tell, because one of the key themes of making Wraith the Oblivion really shine, no matter whether it's something that's focused on the Skinlands, the Shadowlands, somewhere across the Tempest, the Underworld, Stygia, or anywhere else, and any time period, is making it personal. And relating to people's passions and fetters are super important, and we're going to be talking more about that as we carry on with this video. But this does lead to an inherent problem regarding Wraith the Oblivion, or in fact, any new game that you're wanting to play with people, because I'm very much of an advocate of saying you don't need to know all the bits of lore and information to make something work. And I'm also very much of an advocate of like the more sandboxy approach, or maybe if it's a more linear thing, sitting down with a group of players and going, okay, we all want to do this, what are the things that you like, and what sort of things don't you like, and what sort of things do you want to pop up in your game? And if you present a brand new system to people with very little understanding about what works and what doesn't work, it's going to be a bit overwhelming, especially when you've got a book like Wraith the Oblivion 20th Anniversary Edition, where it's a very thick boy, you know, and it's just very overwhelming to present to new players, what do you want to do? And they don't have a fucking clue. So sometimes you, the storyteller, needs to fucking like pull your pants up a little bit, put your big boy shoes on, or big girl or big person shoes, whatever your pronouns may well be, and actually come up with an idea that players can fall into, and then it's down to you, the storyteller, to use your knowledge, whether it's you've been playing since the game's come out, or you're like me who picked it up fairly recently and just like dove balls deep into the lore and the mechanics, or you're trying to work things out as you go to try and teach the people through the game as you're playing, which is super important, which means you've now got to design a story that's fairly linear, in like, this is where you start, this is where you end, or this is where you end and this is where you're going to end again, if you see what I did there. But it's also got to be open enough to allow players to inject their own personality, so you've got to give them some framework to work with, so they can create their characters and concepts and ideas that fits within that narrative pretty well. Now, Wraith the Oblivion is also a bit more challenging because it's one of the few World of Darkness games, actually it's the only one now I think about it, that isn't solely set in the world of the living. Like, you can't really place it in, I don't know, like New York or Chicago, London, Cairo, you know, you can't place it in an actual city as such, because within the Shadowlands, things look all very twisted and gnarled. And then you have this whole pool of history to work with, people with different cultures, backgrounds, and really, it's kind of intimidating for the storyteller to try and pull on all this level of history for their games. And of course, You don't really need all that. All that you need is what you need in the given moment. So if you have a scenario where the players are coming up against, like, I don't know, like some 1920s gangsters, whatever, then you can do some research on that very specific bit for that very session. Now, the whole campaign is surrounding that, then obviously you're going to have to put a bit more legwork. So don't feel overwhelmed about doing all the history and the research. Just research what you need to know, which in many senses makes putting a game in Stygia rather easy, because you can just put a fucking bit of everything. Or not. You can make it really fucking alien if you want to. Now, what am I going to do with this? Haven't a fucking clue, if I'm being totally honest, because what I'm wanting to try and demonstrate with this, that it is very easy and straightforward to create such an open yet linear experience to players. So I'm not going in this with any ideas whatsoever. So how am I actually going to design a game if we're not going to sit the players down and chat? What are you going to do? What do you want to experience in all of this? Because I'm going to be using my latest homebrew, The Hopeful Damned, which is a very big Wraith the Oblivion project I've been working on the last year, which has 6 adventures in it for players, which some of you have already experienced, but it also has a load of solo rules, and we're going to use some of the tools in this homebrew to generate an adventure, and I'm going to show you how that all works right about now.
Now, did you seriously think I was going to let you play one of the darkest TTRPGs ever to exist without a brief discussion regarding Session Zeros and consenting gaming? Well, you're a fucking mug, aren't you? Now, in all seriousness, regardless of the game that you're playing, it is very important to establish some sort of Session Zero safety around the table, what is and isn't okay and all that stuff. And I know that there's a certain generation, or not so much a generation, but a certain breed, a certain cancer or a TTRPG player that finds all that stuff very controversial and triggering, dare I say. But just come here closer for a little bit. That's it, just a bit more. Yeah, just a bit more. A bit more. No, fuck off, that's too close, you fucking pervert. Now, you don't have to call this a Session Zero, you don't have to use consent sheets or other different tools and paraphernalia to decide what is and isn't okay during your games. Like, if you've been playing together for the last 30 odd years, you'll know what is and isn't okay with everybody and know what you can and can't get away with. And that's totally fine, it's just, it's a name that we have given it, Session Zero, the session before the session. And this would, this is just, it could be as simple as sitting down with all your buddies and going, hey, I want to run such and such, it's going to have X, Y, and Z. You with me or not? Or if you're like wanting to find a game online, somebody will say it's going to cover these different things, or it's going to be this specific module, or whatever. It's just to make sure that everybody's all happy and hunky-dory, and if that's something that really bothers you, then find a group that doesn't bother you, where you can do absolutely anything and everything. But just be a bit respectful, okay? But going back to Wraith, like this, it's a game about death. Sure, it's very depressing, and it also has a lot of hope to it. But there are a lot of themes and subjects in there that some people may not want to deal with, such as slavery, genocide, racism. Now, all those things don't have to come up in any shape or form, but they can do in some capacity, especially if you're wanting to explore the grander meta plot. And I think it's reasonable to assume that not everybody may want to explore those different sorts of things. And if you have anything specific in mind, some people may not want to do that as well. Like, parents may not want to have games that focus on the violence of children. In fact, a lot of people wouldn't want that at all. Some people may not want things that focus heavily on drug abuse or alcohol, especially if they're trying to get clean and sober sort of thing, It's just about being a bit respectful. And I get it that there's some instances where you can't really separate some of its themes from the game in question. For example, if we use Vampire the Masquerade, that's a very violent game where the loss of character and will and all those sorts of really unpleasant gaslighting, grooming stuff is very prevalent within vampire media as a whole, and also Vampire the Masquerade. And you can tone those down depending on the GM that you have and how people describing things. But for some people that might be too much, and if that's the case, well, you're just going to have to respect that and go your separate ways. Like, there's one person on the Lore by Night Discord server, I shan't name whom they are, like, they really want to get into Vampire and they like the setting and whatnot, but they have this big phobia on blood, which might make playing that game a bit traumatic, shall we say? and there's some people that may feel really spooked, pun intended, about ghosts. So sometimes you can't like tone down certain things, but there's a lot of things that you can do. So when you're putting together any sort of game, particularly something as dark and like frightening as Wraith, and also when you consider the whole shadow mechanic as well, like, don't be a cunt. Like, I don't think that should be too difficult to understand, but hey, I'm a left-wing fucking snowflake, so what the fuck do I know? You know. And similarly, whilst we're on that sort of like woke nonsense, respect people's pronouns and how they want to be addressed both in-game and outside of that. Because I don't think you would like it if you were treated a certain way that you didn't like it, you know. And if the idea of pronouns offends you or you think it's stupid, you're a cunt and your parents never loved you. Ha ha! Now that we've got all that health and safety stuff out of the way, Holly is going to help me tell you lot about the different types of chronicles that you can run with your game of Wraith the Oblivion. And by helping me, I mean she's going to be my emotional support as I ramble about all of this. She's already given up. Ramble about all of this, the different chronicle types. So, as we discussed already, the key thing to making your game of Wraith the Oblivion really stand out to your players is by having it relatable, something that they can connect to. So when you run something within the Shadowlands, it's something that they can recognize. So like if you're wanting something in New York, the buildings are going to look similar, but they're going to look very different as well. If it's in London, same sort of story, and you can pull snippets of history from there. Like London, it will probably be populated by various industrial workhouses and all that, and smog just polluting the Tempest. New York canonically has the Twin Towers still there as well, because that's very fresh in a lot of people's memories, so all of that essence will be taken to the Shadowlands as well. Just so little bits like that. So if you can try and think of like little landmarks and whatnot to populate your Shadowlands, as it were, that could be really cool for your players to spark onto, even if they don't live there. Just things that they can search and look up and refer to ground them in this strange alien world. But before we get too involved with all of that and what I'm going to do, as I said, there are a few different ways that you can go about setting up that very first session, and there's no right or wrong way of doing this, but I think there are different ways of doing this that have each one having their own pros and cons. So the first thing that you can do is something that I've done before, is just present the scenario without any context, in that the Wraiths are dead, they've been dead for some time, or however long that you may wish them to be, and then you present them with some sort of event or scenario. I ran a game that had them all attend a carnival sort of funfair sort of scenario, and I just said, you haven't been dead long, but you've been dead long enough to like get some, to start appreciating the fact that you are dead and you have these powers and whatnot, which is great because it means there doesn't need to be too much of that awkward setup of like, oh, am I dead? What's going on? Sort of dream sort of thing. And you may not want to do that. You may not want or have the time to focus on all that. If you're running at a convention or something, or one shot for your friends at the local game store, you may not want to focus on all that weird emotional baggage, as it were. Although that being said, that's quite a very important element of Wraith the Oblivion. I feel like the actual dealing with the trauma that you are dead and you are now locked in this weird purgatory. But as I said, there may not be times where you want to do that. There's a lot of instances where just getting on with the story at hand without all the other bits that surround that may be beneficial to you. Now, if you want to go through the whole you've just died and you've woken up thing, which is the sort of route I would recommend, there's a few different ways that you can do that. The players could be dead and you can have them decide how they died, and then they wake up at some random place, and then the story goes on from there. There's a Wraith the Oblivion, there's a couple actually, there's a few adventures that do this. There's one that's divided up into White Wolf magazines, because they were a magazine company before they did the whole World of Darkness thing. I don't remember the actual numbers of said magazine, so I'm going to put them on screen now and you can go and look them up in your own time. I believe they're available on Drive4RPG, but if not, the files are available on an unofficial Wraith the Oblivion Facebook group, which I'll provide in a link in the description below. where the characters are dead and then they wake up in like some warehouse thing, and then they have this sort of conflict with the Sunset Tutelian. The point is that the adventure doesn't tell the players how they died. It gives context of the big twist, as it were, something that the players did as they were mortal, but it doesn't tell you how they die. Like, you all didn't die on the same sort of accident sort of thing, but it allows the storyteller to give the player some freedom to tell them how they died, or if they wanted to have that session prior to that. But I've also done something similar like this as well. I ran a Wraith the Oblivion game called Welcome to the Afterlife. You might remember me advertising that. And the concept of that, the players were starting off and they appeared at an orphanage that had been burnt down. Now, I didn't tell them that they all had to be kids or even that they had to work there, but when they saw that they sort of had those ideas of what the sort of characters they could be, like, we had two characters that were teenagers, and one of them wasn't a part of the orphanage, but they caused a lot of trouble for the people at the orphanage because they were orphans, tee-hee, ha-ha, edgelord sort of crap. But another player was like the caretaker who worked there, and then we were all discussing ideas in the Discord chat, and these two were like having conversations with each other, like, because one was working there and one would clearly knew the other one there. So when those two characters came to as wraiths, there was already a bit of drama because they had this one idea that they could bounce off each other, which was pretty cool. Now, I didn't decide how they were going to die, as I said, and we didn't have a session that led up to that. This was just a one-shot. But having them at this orphanage and then stuff happened gave them a bit of framework to work with. So it's something that was familiar and recognisable, and it was a nice way to integrate the player roleplay into that. The others involve around them resulting of a similar event. So, like, the classic idea is, oh, you've all been in a plane crash, you've all been in a car crash, you know, those sort of things. They all die at the same time, and then they have all that particular event to clean on to. Puts them in a similar circumstance that they can bond together over that sort of thing. They have that safety numbers, they can trust each other because they experience what the other one is going through sort of thing, like it's happening here and now. The problem with that is, I feel it can be a bit restrictive and limited in the sense that people who like to write up loads of backstory and want off their character don't have much of an input about how they remove themselves from this plane. Like, it may help them in why they're on said vehicle and what they're going to do, but I don't know, I feel that's a very lazy cop-out sort of scenario here, and as I said, it can be limiting, but it can also be really cool. Because you then think about, okay, do we know anybody else on the train, plane, car, whatever? Also, the car would imply that they're all friends and family. And if you're playing with a game with a bunch of strangers, that may be weird to have that immediate bond with a bunch of strangers, you know, to start pretending and calling people mum, dad, brother, sister, whatever. Or even the more relaxed version of that is friends, you know? It might be a bit much for some people, might make things a bit already more awkward. Which is why what we're going to do with this little experiment of mine is that we're going to have a bunch of smaller events happen. So the characters do have a bit more agency on how they die, or maybe they won't, and I can just surprise them. Who knows, I haven't decided yet. Where each of the characters, one by one within the first session, the first of these 4 sessions, just end up being killed in one way or another. And if they have ideas about what they want to go, I may go with them depending on the ideas that we'll come up with shortly. Or I may, if they don't have any idea, or I decide that I want to leave it as a total surprise for them, there's that option as well, which I think will be pretty neat. So I think what people will expect is that, as I'm sitting here brewing this now, that there'll be like one massive event where everybody will be killed off. Like, I would start with a player who dies at a car crash or whatever, and it causes a bit of a scene that way. Or if we're going to go with a plane or train crash, it will cause some sort of like knock-on effect from that. But I don't want everybody to have like the same method of death, or that it's all done through violence, like this horrific accident sort of thing. And if it is violent, it's going to be different bits around the world, because this is, after all, the world of darkness. So it might seem a bit weird that you have like these 4 or 5 players who die in really horrific means. As it's the world of darkness, all that gets cranked up to 11. Who knows? As I said, I haven't really decided any of this yet. Just sitting here, brewing here, and as I'm sitting here waffling away to you lot, well, to myself and my 2 dogs, I'm thinking that having them, like, wake up, as it were, and encountering a Reaper, which sort of, like, really signifies that they're dead, Oh, maybe a ferryman. I think a ferryman would be better here, just not making this politically neutral for the time being. And as the things goes on, they carry on with their personal journeys and try and work out how they died and dealing with all that baggage and garbage, as it were. Snippets of factions coming, like a bit from the hierarchy, a bit from the renegades, and they can either join or fight against them, or... Again, I don't know, I'm just waffling away here, really. Because I haven't decided any plot yet, and what we're going to do, we're going to be using the Hopeful Damned, which has some nice oracle tables that can help us with 2-word prompts decide on the direction of our tale to go. So I've already got a bit of a framework here that one player is going to die through a car crash or train crash or whatever, and then everything else is going to come round to that, and one by one they're going to be found by a ferryman. And I think that will take up the most part of the first session. So already just sitting here brewing and thinking about things and waffling away, we have some semblance of plan, but we need like the actual event of the Chronicle to give us more direction. And of course the characters themselves, because I haven't actually asked anybody to be a part of this yet. And a lot of what the players have come up with, which I will get onto later, it's going to help a lot with that particular direction. So if you're new to this whole Oracle stuff in TTRPGs, allow me to show you exactly how that would play out. Oracle tables allow the player, or usually the games master, to roll some dice and decide elements of the ongoing game. You usually see these in more fantasy Dungeons and Dragons sort of things, but when you have a lot of solo play where an individual is both the player and the storyteller in this case, you're going to have to need a supplement to, well, supplement the storytelling mechanics. And sometimes you can also use these as a player as well, or a grouped session where nobody is the games master and everybody like sort of is ad-libbing in free-for-all in the storyteller role. But for this particular instance, we're using this in more traditional play where I, the storyteller, are trying to decide element of the story, planning with some Oracle tables. And you're going to see on the screen now 2 pages of the Hopeful Damned, the scene generation tables. And you can use any sort of oracles for this, but I've designed this specifically to make it as agnostic as possible, setting agnostic as possible, I should say. So regardless of whether you're playing something in the Dark Ages, the Great War, now, 2,000 years from now, it's not too genre specific. So you can use these words and it can work with any system of Wraith Oblivion, any setting of as well as any other game system that you may like. It's not just dictated by Wraith. Now there's some rules and mechanics within the Hopeful Damned that are tailored specifically to Wraith the Oblivion, but you are going to have to check out the Hopeful Damned in your own time, and the recording of this, it is not available at this time, so do keep checking out the YouTube community posts and the Lore by Night social media and other videos that I'll be doing to be kept up to date with that. Now, what we're going to do here, as we kind of already decided on like the opening scene, where basically the opening session rather, everybody is going to be absolutely fucked. They're going to be dying in various different ways, and they're all going to be meeting a ferryman that's going to be shepherding them off towards a shared haunt as we introduce bits of the underworld to them. Now, as I said, these 2 tables, as you have probably noticed, you've got 2 tables here that go up to 100, so we're going to need some D100 dice, or a special D100 ball, but just for the sake of it, to make things super simple, we're going to be using some traditional dice. And I'm going to grab the first D10s or D100s that I see, and it'd be helpful if they're different colours, if you're using 2D10, but you can also get D100, which are labelled exactly as 2D10, but they go up in 10s rather than units. That's the word I'm looking for. Okay, so I've got one interestingly green one, and I've got a black one, so there you go. There you go. I have no idea how well those are turning out, but there you go. So anyway, the idea of this is basically simple. So we're going to treat one of these dice is going to count as the 10s, the other one's going to count as the units. In this instance, I'm going to say that the black one with the purple bit is going to be our 10s, and the green one is going to be our units, and I might forget that. And I'm going to write bits of this down to try and help, you know, so I know what I'm doing and I don't just have to rely on this little video, as it were. It probably won't be little because I don't do little videos. Anywho, let's roll some dice. Okay, so the first number is 62, so we then come onto the table, the first table, the scene type activity, and 62 says investigate. Well, that's a very good start to any session. Alright, and a 92. So we then come over to the scene type focus table, and animals. So it's the second session, and I'm presuming it is the ferryman who is having the players look into these sort of animals or whatever. Actually, as I'm saying that, I have a better idea. We're going to introduce the concept of the hierarchy. Now, the ferryman may show them about, but the ferrymen are politically neutral. They do not get involved with Stygian affairs. And what the idea that I'm having here is that they're in the haunt and they're getting accustomed, and the haunt is not registered with the hierarchy. So this ferryman has done something that they shouldn't have done, and the hierarchy have caught wind of this. The player's obviously going to protest against this, that they don't want this to happen, you know, they don't want to die, they didn't know what they were doing, whatever. And of course when they mention the ferryman, that is going to get everybody's fucking back up, because it might make the legionnaires feel a bit awkward, like, what will happen if they could strike back, and nobody wants to feel the wrath of the ferryman. So my idea with this is that the legionnaires are going to approach the characters in their haunt, probably passing through it as this as well. Like, you will be allowed to keep your haunt if you are able to help us locate some barguests, which are like these molliated dog beast things that the legionnaires use. Which are very dangerous, very powerful, as some of you have encountered before. So alright, so that will take up the first bit of their session. Or at least the opening scenario. Locate missing bar guests. And of course, the immediate question is, where were they last located? So we're going to turn back to the scene generation tables and roll again. I'm going to do that again because I've landed on 92 again. And I think this is a little suspect. 52. We'll make it work. 52 on the activity table is withdraw. 12. And 12 would be bad. Withdraw. Bad. My initial thought with this doesn't quite answer the question of where they were last located, but these molliated dogs, the barguests, are bad stock, as it were. Like, they have their sentience, because the way that they come about is that they are molliated wraiths, so you get a whole bunch of them and they're just all squished together sort of thing. And if you're unaware, molliate is kind of like Ghost Vicissitude, but it's a lot cooler, in my opinion. So withdrawing the bad, like, perhaps the twist here is that these barguests are, you know, they're not, they have their sentience, as they said, and they still have their whereabouts with them. And that presents this huge fucking dilemma for the players. Do they send them back to the hierarchy and they're able to keep their haunt? Or do they go about and set them free? Moral dilemmas. I like that. I like it. See, with just those 2 words, well, 4 words technically if you count the previous 2, we have got essentially an entire session with these. Okay, so that's like the twist of it, and when the players do locate them, but we still need to try and work out where they are and see if these tables can help us out with that. So rolling on the activity table, 90. 90 is pursue, and 9. Interesting, the numbers swap over here. Rival. Okay, so the knee-jerk reaction I have here is that it involves the renegades, which are the rivals or enemies of the hierarchy, which actually works really well because we need to introduce the renegades in a much fuller sense rather than my previous knee-jerk reaction of, like, they get in the way of the ferryman and the ferryman just, like, you know, has to shoos them away sort of thing. If I didn't mention that, I thought about it, and I'm saying it now. But okay, so it involves the renegades. The renegades have intercepted a patrol, and these barguests are, like, in cages or whatever, and the players must go to the renegades and free the barguest, or rather bring them towards them. Or they go and speak with the renegades. No, actually, I think it would be more engaged, because I was just thinking maybe it would be interesting if they have that conversation with the renegades. No, and I think it would be better if they encounter the renegades, maybe a bit of combat or whatever, you know, or a bit of sneaking espionage sort of thing, and they find these cages and they realise, okay, this is when they realise that they have sentience, that the cruel nature of the hierarchy and the legionnaires, and it just sort of like blends everything in together really, really nicely. So with 6 words, we have a session. Isn't that fantastic? 6 words, your imagination, some dice, No AI used at all. Just a bunch of generic words, basically. And I suppose as we're talking about the Legionnaires, we can decide which hierarchy faction have this necropolis under control, or at least it's implying that they have a stronger influence on the renegades. It could be like a 50-50. It could be the hierarchy trying to establish some more dominance within the necropoli. And we'll get onto that later, probably. And I think in order to decide this, we're going to have to use some other tables. And what this allows you to do is, again, rolling some dice, is to decide which legion is involved. This usually comes under the form of deciding in the manner in which your character has died, because they're extended and expanded character creation rules for this. And I'm not going to show you this table, but I will inform you that this does require me to roll a d8. And the first colour I see is the first one that I'm going to work with. And we've got Hot Barbie Pink. Wowzers. That is a 7, and that means we have the paupers, those who die through mysterious circumstances. Spicy stuff. And of course, between all of this, the players are going to have some time, to interact with their passions and their fetters, and I'll present those narrative opportunities once I have those character sheets and those concepts in, so I'm able to insert into my plans, like, okay, so such and such is going to appear, or this, or that, and depending on how they die, I may just sprinkle some of those plots, but we're choosing the overall plot here, and we'll pepper in those elements, which should be a lot of fun. So, that is the second session done, because remember, we've got 4 sessions here. So the first one is them dying and getting used to the Skinlands, the Shadowlands, and the Skinlands, I suppose. The second one is that they are tasked by the hierarchy to go and retrieve some bar guests, and I can probably work out a bit more about the ins and outs of this once we roll on some more tables and work out a bit more this hierarchy renegade relationship. And technically speaking, I really shouldn't plan too much ahead of this, because depending on what the players are doing, we're going to get some very different results. But I suppose we can use this to try and work out what is happening in the bigger world, because of course the players are going to be chasing off their own passions and fetters and whatnot and dealing with all of those. But of course, it's not just about the players' intimate world. Things are going to be happening around them, and we're going to be using this opportunity to make the world feel a bit more believable. So if I just start to have a couple of ideas about what's going on behind the scenes, I can then tweak things very easily to better fit their reactions, and later on in this video we'll find out exactly what's going on. So, third session. So over the halfway mark, really. We're going to roll up on the scene type activity table once more and work out what's going to be happening in the grander scheme of things. 39. We're getting lots of 9s and 6s here. Give. 81. Status quo. Well, that's not dramatic at all. Well, oddly enough, that actually works rather nicely, because I feel that these bar guests are very important now. It's a lot more than just releasing these, misshapen, deformed wraiths. These individuals have some in status now. Probably more so to the renegades, because if the renegades are keeping hold of them, I think it's going to be a bit more than trying to train them, as they have sentience involved. Maybe they're trying to find a means of separating them, or having them find some use within their little clique, as it were. So there's that element of it. But you also have the element if they decide to go against the hierarchy and let them go. The hierarchy is going to be a bit pissed, and then trouble will ensure. So the renegades are going to come after the players, and the hierarchy is going to come after the players. And I think we need to decide a rough idea what's going to happen either way. So we're going to do the renegades first. Again, rolling on the activity and focus tables. 62. Fuck that, we're doing that again. 58. 58 is... Betray. 85. Sorcery. Betray sorcery. Huh. Now, the immediate thing that comes to mind, I didn't want to do too much cross-play here with different splats, but my mind immediately goes to vampire, with one of the, with the Tremere, or one of the necromantic clans or bloodlines. Betray sorcery. I'm going to swap the numbers round for the last one. So rather than 85, we get 58 again to see if that gets anything on the focus table. Scheme. Portray scheme. Doesn't get anything with me. So if we swap over the 58 in the activity table and we get 85. Passionate. Passionate sorcery. Okay, I get something with that one. Passionate sorcery. Maybe one of these bar guests is a lover, or one part of the bar guest is a lover, and if they're handed back to the hierarchy, that creates a bit of interesting spice. It also feeds back into the first thing. Beyond the we're letting these go because they are actual people sort of things, like the humane thing, as their ghost, you know. But yeah, that makes it a little bit spicy. And I'm putting that with saucy because, you know, true love, there's no spell or potion that's supposed to make people fall in love with each other. It's just how my brain is just tripping off with those particular words. And I know it took a bit of a while for me to come up with that idea, but I think it's important to highlight that, you know, you don't have to take the immediate answer there. And if you're not getting anything, just roll the dice around again or just swap the numbers around. And that's obviously really going to piss off the renegades. Like, it really amps up the importance that not only are you now just a bit cautious of them, you're now fucking public enemy number one. Now, what's the hierarchy going to do about all of this? Because there's obviously, beyond them being sentient, there's a bit more to it than that. Like, what is the significance of having them here? So, we're going to go back to the activity table and roll our dice. 64. 64 is observe. Interesting. I'm going to roll that one again because it landed in the middle. 79. 79, the wealthy. Okay. Now this seems like a really fucking weird idea. What if this sentient bar guest who is a true love, and I'm doing that for a reason, is actually a spy? What if this was set up by the hierarchy to investigate the renegades, and the renegades were supposed to capture them, and it's acting as a spy, and they are relying on the players to set them free, to report back to the hierarchy what the renegades are up to, which to me sounds like the renegades are the ones in charge, and the hierarchy is trying to establish a bit more of a strong foothold, which is really fucking cool. Again, 2 words has come up with this very, I feel, really cool plot twist and a bit of development. So it's not a true love after all. It's clearly this operation has been going for some time, and the hierarchy, the Paupers Legion, is playing the waiting game. Wow, that is so fucking... I honestly wish that I was a player of this so I could have my fucking mind blown the way that they're going to have their mind blown. Again, 2 words has just caused this whole thing to explode. But that does make me think, what happens if the players decide to keep the bar guests or have them as a close ally rather than setting them go? Because there's always going to be that one group or player that like have the weird monster as a pet sort of thing. So we now need to roll and decide that. So 54 is kill. Well, that's off to a terrific start. 21. Inspiration. What will 12 be for the focus table? Bad. Kill. Bad. Kill bad. Or kill inspiration, because, you know, we're swapping some of the words around. But kill bad to me, obviously we're feeding in more into this, like, espionage spy thing. It would make sense if they're playing the role of the spy that the bar guest would be determined to kill the person that did this to them, or the individuals. Which is a very good way of setting up. After all, this is the 3rd session, so this would be like the anti-climax sort of thing. Going into the hierarchy base and confronting them, and there'll be a bit of sneaking around and whatnot, a bit of combat, and then that particular session would end with the big reveal. Then in actual fact, they're spies and they have all this information to fully commit to fighting back one way or another. So we have these 3 different paths, as it were, to try and determine how exactly the Barghest is going to relay that bit of information. Also, there's the really fucking odd opportunity that if the players decide to kill them, which I don't think they should do. If we're acting on the route that they are sentient, beyond they're just like mindless monsters sort of thing, they may decide to kill them. Well, how that plot's going to develop, and I'll make those changes, of course, but obviously if they take them to the Renegade's going to try and get their lovers back, which is also going to draw the presence of the hierarchy, I reckon. If they collect them for the hierarchy, the players will be made to keep hold of them, and after so many days, whatever, the hierarchy will come and collect them. Which in that instance will allow, and the previous one kind of, to allow a bit more freeform for players to investigate their passions and whatnot, so we can feed more into the idea that it's all real personal stuff regarding the players, so they can focus on their passions and follow up with other backstories and things that they come up with. But of course, if they decide to like do neither and like keep the bar guests for themselves, then they're gonna have to deal with basically both elements coming at them, so to speak, providing that they're not going to listen to the bar guest to go and deal with the one who made them this way. And if we do that one, more of the session will be focused on sneaking into this citadel, this base of operations of whatever that may well be, on top of integrating like passions and lovers and whatnot into all of that. But it'll be a bit more linear if it goes around that way. At least that's how I'm envisioning here. And then we come on to the 4th session. So session 4, the final session with all of this. It's basically depending on what the players are going to do here that's going to determine the outcome. And either the Legionnaires are going to push back, even they're going to side with the Renegades and revolt with them, as it were. As I'm saying that, actually, even if the Renegades do keep them in the cages, I think the players would want to let them go anyway, because it seems a bit barbaric all the same. And we kind of need to decide what happens also if the players decide to side with the Renegades. And I think that could also be another espionage mission, to investigate a patrol route or something. I think that will work rather nicely. But yeah, with the session 4, to try and work out what's actually going to happen here. So I'm going to label here Hierarchy and Renegade, like what the reaction's going to be. And obviously this is going to change depending on the precise natures, because if they side with the Hierarchy and then hand over, the bar guest is going to reveal everything to them, and then there's going to be that big revolt. And also they'll probably talk about what the players are like to see where their loyalties stand, sort of thing. Just to test them, sort of thing, to see whether they're enemies or not. And if they're not with the Renegades and they're like an independent faction, that makes it more difficult for themselves, because now everyone hates them. So again, just a few words, and we've got this whole really interested and possibly convoluted plot line to work with here. But going back to session 4, we need to work out the manner of approach in which the Renegades and the Hierarchies are going to go at each other. And again, we're going to tweak this depending on what the players do. So focusing on the Hierarchy, and I should probably sped that up a bit more because my writing is rather fucking huge. Activity table. 38 inform, again, and 75 enforcements. Enforcement sounds like to me, well, obviously we're going to inform the players that they have been very useful in all of this, and the big twist will be revealed, so to speak. And if they side with the Hierarchy, they may act as messengers to, you must go to this specific location and inform everybody else with us, perhaps, of this, and now you're going to fight against the Renegades. Yeah, I kind of like that. That's pretty neat. That's the first part, and then there's the big encounter. 5. Recruit. Alright, this sounds like a really fucking big operation. 9. Rivals. Recruit? Rival. Maybe this isn't so much rival, but more like getting other wraiths involved, like outside, or maybe the players are tasked, because they're an independent party, they can recruit individuals to stand up with the Hierarchy and using whatever tactics that may be. So recruiting like standardized wraiths fighting against the rivals. See, you can twist and bend these words. So part of that is they have to recruit, and then they like join the Hierarchy in their whole march sort of thing against the Renegades, because they're, as I said, an independent party and all that. And then there'll be the big fight that happens that I can brainstorm in a moment. But yeah, that's the kind of Hierarchy sort of element. Now, what's the Renegades going to do? Go back to the activity table. We get 80 exactly. trust. I have a slight suspicion about where this is going to go. 2. Fantasy. Trust fantasy. The idea that comes to mind with that is that it's quite clear they're going to get completely annihilated by the hierarchy, but what if I make 2 into 20? What does that become? Intellectual. Okay, they're both kind of the same thing here. So we've got a bit of a backstory here with this leader and the fantasy. Because at this point it's been revealed that, or it should probably be revealed, that the true love is the Barghest and this Barghest is a spy. And this fantasy intellectual kind of thing is that this leader's fucking delusional, that maybe the love can conquer all and they're just being tricked even further, even though the evidence is staring them in the face. Or is it? Maybe it's some other Legionnaire thing going on as well. Players can probably hypothesize that. But this leader of this renegade faction is a wee bit delusional. And I think it's going to break the trust of the renegades a bit more. Which, if the players don't side with that, that's still going to be happening in the background, possibly. And even if the leader doesn't find out some way, somehow, like, they may perform like this forward march sort of thing, like a full frontal assault, where they don't necessarily have the numbers to counteract this. So now, where this is once an instance of the hierarchy don't have much control, they now have a lot of control within this necropoli. So now we've established that the major Legion faction here are the Paupers Legion, which is pretty wizard, I think. So there's that element of it, and the players will probably have to try and work out what to do here, whether they like try and convince them, you know, to stand down, not to go into the full frontal assault, but to be on the defensive, or whatever that variant may well be, or it may just cause the players just to go fucking bail ship. And I will emphasize that, and I'm going to emphasize that now, just because like all the way through this I'm making the players like make their choice and their decision. So you do not have to be assigned with the hierarchy as like the default, or the renegades as the default. It's not like Vampire where players are either Camarilla or Anarch for the most part. Like, they can be free agents and they can just pay lip service or just try and stay out of people's ways. You could have a whole circle of people where everybody's a bit of everything. It might make play a bit difficult with all these different ideologies, but it makes the interesting that Wraith encourages that sort of open level of role-playing communication here, which I think is really fucking cool. You don't really get that with a lot of World of Darkness games. So from the player's standpoint, a lot of this is going to, if they side with the Renegades, a lot of this is going to be you know, talking the leader down, and I'm sure the leader is going to ask the players to go off and do something whilst they prepare themselves, sort of thing. So let's decide what the activity and focus will be. 73 on the activity table is present, and on the focus table we have 84, despair. Present despair. I think this takes on like the inverse of the hierarchy plan. Like, the hierarchy gets the players to go and like gather the forces, like the time has come, you'll be safe, whatever, if you join up the fight, whatever. In this instance, to side with the renegades, who are clearly in a much smaller number, the players have a much harder task of making them see that, oh, we are going to fucking die, probably, you know? So the tension and the emotion's a lot different, and they have to try and convince like these standby wraiths or whatever, or those not so affiliated with either faction, that joining the renegades is the better option. And the way that this really reflected in game, that with the hierarchy, like, it'll be like a standard difficulty of 6 or 7 depending on what they say and do and their methods of doing this, but with a renegade it's like 7 or 8, so it's just that bit higher. They've got a bit more to work with here, which I think is narratively appropriate. So we're setting up the situation with the dice rolls here. Obviously, if they decide to side with neither, they have their own options. They can just fucking bail out and try and fucking run or hide or whatever, and this will obviously reflect the outcome of the battle, so to speak, because I think it's pretty obvious by how I'm talking about this, the hierarchy is going to win. Or maybe they won't, it'll depend on what the players do, but I think a lot of them would side with the hierarchy just on principle of its size or whatever. But then again, they might both seem like absolute fucking nutters, and as I said, I want to give players the option to be an independent party, and if they want to fucking bail ship and find a different necropoli, then they absolutely can. And I also know that a lot of this is taking on a similar form to one of the adventures in the Hopeful Damned, but I think it's so different enough that I think it just stands out, and the stakes are different and it's more emotional. And also because this is a chronicle, we can actually play a bit more into people's passions and fetters a bit more in between all of this, especially if we have a situation where the players are think they're going to die. Then they can have those final farewells or whatever, however they go about doing that. So we now need to decide the overall conflict of how this is all going to play out. And I'm not going to focus on a specific faction here, because a lot of it will depend on what the players do, but I need to have some idea about what the hierarchy are going to do, because they're probably going to be the ones that have the most control here. And I'm also going to look through Book of Legions, which is the Wraith Oblivion source book that has information on the Legion, so I can have a bit fine-tune my answers here to make sure that it's within the realms of the Pauper's Legion to be doing this, or whether they're going to be calling upon stronger allies or whatever, because from memory the Pauper's Legion isn't actually all that big, so performing a full frontal assault may not be within character, but you know, just a bit of research and a bit of reading of the material is going to help me with that. So let's rule out what's going to happen, or the overall plot. 88, 2 fat ladies, entice. Okay, this sounds very interesting. I've already got an idea about what's going to happen here, and that's just one word. And 28, entice pleasure. Oh, that is fucking diabolical. Lore by night, you heathen. So this is going to be set up as a sabotage, like an ambush. That the hierarchy / bar guest is going to lure the leader out. Oh, we just want to talk. Let's have a nice civil conversation about dividing territory, and it's enticing on the renegades' delusions, the leaders specifically, their delusions of the Barghest, like making this work out sort of thing. Because we've already talked about how this leader still thinks that the hierarchy is doing something that no, this cannot be, like this is like a double agent spy sort of thing. So there's going to be this meeting, and the players are obviously going to be present for that. And then depending on what I read and decide when I'm doing my research, they may be able to notice like agents on one side or the other that are wanting to set up this sabotage to take in Renegade and its leaders, and all the players, depending on how much of an input they have with the Renegades here. Alright, so that's part 1 of this. I might do this in 2 to 3 parts depending on what I come up with. 52. That is going to be on the activity table. Withdraw. 14. Opposition. Yeah, that makes fucking sense. And I think this will have the hierarchy suggesting, yeah, sure, you may have your lover back. We may give you this Barghest and the whole chain and collar muzzle thing that does control them, providing that you withdraw from the Necropoli. You take all of your members out of here. That's the deal. And obviously, the leader is going to do this because we've established he's a bit fucking loopy. And I've gone with he because that's just what I've defaulted to. I might change my mind. No, I'm going to stick to my guns. It's going to be a he. He, him pronouns will leave. Or the players may do such a good job of convincing the leader that he may play along with this. Or it might be more a case of, no, we're never going to withdraw, fuck you. You know, and they may bring him back from his senses. But I actually like the idea that he's just fucking out of it. Like, there is no hope with it regarding of what side. Or maybe, if the players do a really bad job at convincing him, he may play along with it, kill the Barghest, and then kill himself. Like, if I can't have him, no one will. That really sort of messed up love idea. And again, we've got 4 words here to decide this particular outcome. And then really, depending on what the players do, and the angle that we're wangling here, that will ensure the combat, and people will probably die. And I think with the death of the renegade leader, it may cause them to flash out like rats, because we've established their numbers are few and far between. If the players have sided with the renegades, or they're an independent, then they're obviously going to be chased down and hunted down as well. But if they side with a hierarchy, well, they have a reward of nice statuses within the Paupers Legion. Depending on the character concepts and what they do, they may be awarded pretty lofty positions within the Legion itself. And if they side with the Renegades, I think they can probably... Well, obviously they have some status within that particular Renegade faction. They have similar elevated positions, but obviously without the status of being with the Legion, if that makes sense. Like, it's a lot more material with the Legionnaires, but it's not... It's more social with the Renegades. Who knows? Maybe the Paupers have got some sort of weapon up their sleeve or whatever that they can claim that they wouldn't be able to get hold of as specific Legionnaires. Who knows? So yeah, that's kind of our plot here. So just to recap briefly, the players die in various different accidents and circumstances, and they're shown to a haunt by a ferryman. They're approached by a Legionnaire or two or several that their haunt is unsanctioned and they're not allowed to be here. They discover that the ferryman put them there and they don't want to piss off a ferryman. So they then task it upon the players to go and retrieve some stolen Barguests, some very important hounds that belong to them. The players find the Barguests through investigation work, encountered with the Renegades prior to that, but when they encounter the Barguests they realise they've got sentience. Maybe one of them or all of them are spies, but one of them is the true love of the Renegade leader. And in so many days, the players have to go and hand over the Barguests, and depending on what the players do, it's going to piss off the Renegades and the hierarchy one way or another, and it's going to be revealed that this whole true love thing is a double agent spy sort of thing, which informs us onto the fourth session where the players have to go and find recruitment, or at least convince players to stay out the way. The players have to convince other races to stay out the way, or whatever, or join the forces or whatever, which leads on to the final confrontation, which is like a standoff sort of thing. You can have your lover providing that you and your forces fuck off, and depending on the mental state of the Renegade leader, they're either going to accept and go off with the Barguest, who will continue to serve as a spy. The leader will push back, or the leader will kill themselves and the Barguest, under that whole delusion of, if I can't have them, no one can, and the world's not living without them, so to speak, and they'll put themselves in a harrowing or immediately succumb to Oblivion. There could be another option, actually, going back a little bit, if the players do such a bad job of convincing them. Like, that could be enough to tip them over into, like, succumbing to Oblivion, and then returning as a Spectre, if not immediately, but further down the line. And if the players are assigned with the Renegades and all of this happens, well, they are now immediately have to lead the Renegades one way or another, which is all very spicy stuff. And of course, in between all of this, we're going to allow opportunities for the players to do their own personal stuff and passions and backstories and whatnot, which is quite a lot really to cover in 4 sessions. But I think it's possible, because I feel confident in my storytelling, and we have this framework to work with to give it a bit of direction. You know, so basically their stuff are the side quests, and we have the main quest here, as it were, if we put it in video game terms. But yeah, here we have, all done with dice rolls, and my amazing imagination written down on a page of A4 of paper, and recorded, because I'm going to come back to my notes in a moment and can't read a fucking thing. So, yeah, that's basically it. We have now decided the overall Chronicle, and I should really come up with a name for it at some point. A Dog Eats Dog World is a fucking working title. I'll probably come up with something better, but I kind of like that, so that's something that we're going to work with here. And the reason why I'm focusing on giving it a title, because I actually now need to go and advertise this, because all the way through this video, I've made the assumption that you, the storyteller, have already gone out of your way and gotten players. Maybe you haven't had that sort of conversation, or you observe that a lot of people wanted to play on a Discord server or a Facebook group or whatever, or Reddit. Maybe you have this idea for a game already and you want to cast out an advert somehow, or need to get people involved with it somehow, and you just don't know what to do. Well, having advertised quite a few games in my lifetime, I'm going to show you what I do, the methods in which you're going to do, and some do's and don'ts that you may want to consider, so we can get this game rolling, so people can play Wraith the Oblivion 20th Anniversary Edition with yours truly, your Lore Saviour. So when you're advertising your game online, there's really a few things you've got to make sure that you cover. You probably should mention the title of the game, you should mention the system and the edition. You should mention the time and the time zone, which is all very important, because I see so many people actually put, oh, I want to do a game on like X day on evenings, but your evening is different to somebody else's evening. So it's just, those are kind of the basics really, like the core essentials, and then you can start to define like what's actually involved, you know, the description and all, how character creation stuff and all that stuff works, but it's all very specific to you. So if we come over to the Lore Saviour Discord server, we have a looking for a game channel, and yes, I'm advertising my server here, but if we just see here, there's quite a few people who have advertised games here, like, and although I have never set up an actual format for people to do things, you could see that people have done it the same way. I like the example here, Chronicle name, Prince of Shadows, base system, Dark Ages Fae, any homebrews. Yes, that's very important, especially with Dungeons and Dragons, where you actually have a lot of fan content out there. Not so much common with World of Darkness, but it's important to put that down as well, like preferred time and time zone. Where, of course, something I forgot to mention, like how are you going to be playing online? I intend to be playing this Wraith the Oblivion game via Discord. I'll be making a separate server for this because I like having it all together. I'm that weird brand of freak that likes to have folders within folders within folders. And once I've put that all together, I'm going to show you how I do all of that. It's fairly straightforward, to be honest, but I know Discord can be a bit overwhelming for people, as is setting up any new bit of tech. I just find it really simple to do what I want to do, which is basically fuck all, because I'm very much a fear to the mind storyteller. And then it goes into the various descriptions here. This one down here is different player, Chronicle name, base system, homebrews, language, preferred system. Put this one by nobody. Name, description, all the logistics things. And they've put a picture here, although that's very naughty of them because they never actually supplied a image description, which is very important for the Lore Saviour Discord server because we have visually impaired and blind individuals, and I want to make sure that everybody feels that they're partaking in the media. So do keep that in mind. And other servers have this rule as well. Yeah, it's just important to make sure that you have all of that covered, really. Again, just going through all these different here, same person from before, they've actually done it to a separate server and provided a link to it so people can go and join. And also, this one's a play by post, which is the PBP thing here. Like, so rather than doing things with cameras and microphones, you just sort of type away. That's not my sort of cup of tea, but for some people, that's like the only way that they can play, just like dipping in and out every so often, which is absolutely fine. But yeah, just make sure that when you're doing that on a like Facebook group, Reddit, whatever, that you follow its rules if there are any. And also, if it's a server that doesn't allow people to advertise the games, don't be a dick. Find somewhere else to do it. Like, it's not difficult, people. Another place that you may want to go to advertise your games is startplaying.games. This isn't sponsored or anything, it's just I'm aware of it, and it's something that I've used when I've run games with people outside of my Discord server. If I advertise it on social media and my YouTube and Facebook groups and some other Discord servers, haven't missed any now, I promise. I just direct them all to start playing because there's an easy way for me to do it. I would give you like a little tour about what the whole site looks like, but for some fucking weird reason, the company has like this weird fetish of changing its layout every 5 fucking seconds. But when you sign up as a games master, it kind of looks like this. You may recognise some of these games that I've done in the past. I'm just going to go over to one-shots here, because just to show that how different it looks. They're the various Wraith games I ran throughout 2024, Vampire, and so on and so forth. But this one here, if I get it to work, Dog Eat Dog World, a Wraith the Oblivion Chronicle. This is waiting approval because you can't just like submit games. You have to create a template and then it has to get approved, which is understandable, I guess, because you can earn money through this site. So you come down here, the basic information. It helps you very much in all those different bits and pieces, like the title, the format, the game system, game description. Try and keep it fairly simple. Obviously, you want to make it evocative and exciting, to lure people into it, especially if you are wanting to play something that's a bit more obscure, or basically anything there's in Dungeons & Dragons, Vampire the Masquerade, or Call of Cthulhu. But you don't want to embellish too much, because, you know, I have often found that people don't fucking read these properly, as I will touch on in a moment. A little bit to grab people in, what it is, how the game will pan out, how it will be, you know, how this is going to lure people in. Like, this Chronicle is perfect for you if, and blah blah blah. I'm not going to read all these out, including some themes and genre tags. I presume you can search those up with Start Playing. I'm never too sure. There's an image, you can upload a thumbnail, we'll get onto that in just a moment, but that's the basic design that I've done, but I'll talk more about that in a moment. including the session duration, player range. In this case, these games are free. Safety tools, yeah, we talked about this whole consent thing earlier on, and if you don't like it, you're a fucking freak. Content warnings, I've put various, and I've put violence against children just because spectres may come up, and there's a whole cast of spectre known as striplings, which are all exclusively, well, they're below the age of 10, so that's just there as a precaution, rather it's something I intend to do going in. But I know people will see that and just, like, not want to do that, which is absolutely fine. I wouldn't want to spring that on people, so it's important to be upfront about these things. It's not difficult. Then you got some more details about how to use safety tools and whatnot, and a bit more of the themes here, which the adventure delves into themes of emotional detachment, murder, and psychological horror. Players should feel comfortable with mature content and the exploration of trauma and potential madness. And then I give rules about character creation. All here, basically all beginner stuff. We want some. Everybody's going to have to put at a minimum a dot of haunt. Actually, I've put 1 point of dot, no more, no less. And I've put this bit down here in capitals because I personally get very wound up when I create this ad, people sign up, and then don't join the Discord server that I make, because you can provide a link for people to join, whatever. And it really bugs me because I then get like messages, oh darn it, I was too slow, like, I just missed it, oh this looks so cool, rah. And yet they can't join because somebody else is like pissing about, not joining the server. So I'm hoping if I put that in fucking capital letters, people will see it. And I will put that again, because you then, once this template has been approved, I'll then be able to like plan the sessions and do timings and whatnot, and then prepare a little message that will appear when people have signed up. Well done for signing up, sort of thing. Glad you want to play. This is what you need to do. So if I make that fucking clear up front, and I'll do this again once I advertise this in video form and on social media posts, I will also make that clear to make sure that that cannot be missed. So really, at this point, people don't have any excuses. Now we come over to Canva, which I've showed many times before in these sort of like how to do videos. Canva is what I use to make thumbnails and whenever of any description, be it for YouTube, my Discord server, Twitter, social media banners, YouTube banners of course, and of course thumbnails so they start playing ad things. I was going to do a time lapse for this, but for some reason OBS and Canva weren't speaking very well together, and I thought fuck it, I'm just going to show the final product instead. So what we have here, all of this comes from Wraith the Oblivion. I feel that should be pretty obvious. These two figures come from first edition. This is obviously the behind that is the there we go. That is the obviously the Wraith the Oblivion 20th anniversary logo, and the background here, if I just go to position, find that particular layer, and if I just click crop for a moment, which is there, and zoom out, you can see that piece down there. That's actually from Wraith the Oblivion first edition as well, because you can get all these different template things from the Storyteller's Vault, art packs essentially, and templates to make your own World of Darkness source books, which is why if you've ever been on the Storyteller's Vault, like how do they make it so professional? It's like that's how like these templates exist. Obviously these two pieces are by Joshua Timbrook. I put this glow with Canva, remove the background because there's more going on with these individuals. Like you can see that the edits I've made aren't 100% perfect, but in honesty it just needs to be good enough to get the job done. I like the contrasting colours. You've got the red for anarchy, as it were, and blue, which sort of like the teal wraith, sort of the contrast in the good or the bad, or maybe the sophisticated and the anarchy, you know. I just kind of like the distinctions there. I usually go for something a bit more simple, like it would have like the text there, the title, which there's nothing wrong with doing, and maybe I could have put the Legion of Paupers logo in the back, because as you saw with the previous ones that I did, I just had like the Wraith key to Stygia, and then the text down there, but I wanted to change things up a little bit for this one so it didn't become too predictable. And I also wanted to do this particular avenue to prove a point that you do not need fucking AI to make these thumbnails and things stand out. Alright, now I am going to address that Canva is dipping its toes more into generative AI, and I fucking hate that. Now, most of that is only available if you are a premium member, which I am, but I do not use it. It's just the main reason why you have a premium account is so I can remove the background and then do the further edits with that. But even so, There are places online where you can do that stuff for free. There's other softwares that you can use that does that for free, and you have to physically do that yourself. Or you may know somebody who could say, "Hey mate, could you just like spend a few moments just like removing the background so I can just have that guy there and this individual here?" And it'll take a bit of time. Either way, either you do it yourself or you get somebody else to do it. But you do not need AI. And yes, this is going to become a little rant on AI art, because if we just come back over to startplaying.games, like this is the site that you see when you sign up as a player and you go to find games or find games. I'm going to go to find games here, and I'm not going to type anything in, and already most of the fucking shit I see is AI art. AI art, AI art, AI art. Probably AI, that isn't, but you know, it's just, it really bugs me because of the very principle about how it all works. Like AI generative content things like ChatGPT and Midjourney work using algorithms that basically scrapes information online and then interprets that through its own logic, algorithms and whatnot, and produces some semi-compelling definition of artwork. And I use the word scrape because that's what it does. It steals. It's plagiarism software. It's not an artist or writer who has spent years upon years being influenced by something and then giving their own twist and interpretation of it. Like, for fuck's sake, like, even though these two here have produced different results, they have a very similar sort of hyper-realistic look to them. So they're very fucking similar. And it's just lazy. It's really fucking lazy. Start Playing Games has artwork that you can use to create things from, or just have them as that image. Like, that's just fucking... I believe that's just on their Google Drive anyway. So... And Google is there. You could spend a bit of money with a stock photo or two or some artwork, or pay somebody to do a bit of artwork for you. But I know it costs money. It's not cheap a lot of the time. And you're absolutely right. But neither is signing up to things like Midjourney and ChatGPT. Like, the money that you could use on an artist and support independent artists and, you know, companies and softwares and actually learn some creative tools, you waste on this plagiarism software that, I will also add, is bad for the environment, and it uses so much energy. And a lot of the efforts that we have put into saving the environment have been countered by a load of people just cutting corners and using generative AI. It's just so fucking bad. And as an independent creator myself, in many different fields, it really fucking pisses me off when people support this and they're just being lazy. I've never used the generative AI artwork in my stuff. Like, sure, when things like DALL-E or whatever it was called came out, and Artbreed, and we're all like fucking about with the weird things it created, and we didn't know. We all did a little bit of that. And then it started to come to light about how it actually worked, and it was stealing and pinching and just creating these weird abominations of things. And it really bothers me that doesn't irritate a lot of people. That doesn't make people angry and fed up. Like, I have done videos about this before, and specifically I was talking about the latest seasons of Me, Myself and Die, and Trevor Devall used it for his opening cinematics for his season of that, and he's also started to use it for his upcoming TTRPG. And I talked about this, and I mentioned a VTM content creator who basically uses AI for everything that they've done, called Terillium, and that caused off a bit of controversy on a Facebook group, because one other smaller VTM related creator then thought I was now having a pop at smaller creators. Well, don't use AI. Actually put in the fucking research and put your own spin on things. Yeah, I know not everybody has a good speaking voice like mine that's clear and concise. I'm not rubbing my ego there. That's just something I know I'm very good at doing. But you could do something unique with that. It could be someone based in your part of the world, and explore a bit more of that dynamic. Really embellish in your personality and just find something cool and unique about that. And I remember there was one person on that whole Facebook thing who was, when I tried to help the content creator in particular, hey, this is what you could do. You could like save a bit of money and do basically the stuff I've been saying already. Also with like the various art packs and what, and they had a go at me, oh, you're going to use the same stuff that everybody else does, and does that really make you unique? Just really shit like that. So, and yet with AI art, it fucking steals stuff from everybody else, which creates fucking vomit. That really bothered me. Because at the end of the day, you really don't need the best thumbnail in the world to make something stand out. It just has to be fucking clear and engaging and recognisable to some degree. Like, 2 of the highest videos on my YouTube channel are some of the oldest. They are my lore dives on Clan La Sombra and Zemisi. These are what the fucking thumbnails look like. These are some of the earliest things that I've done. And quite frankly, they're fucking awful. I hate them. Looking at them now, and I really wish I could go back and change. I could easily go and change them, actually. There's nothing stopping me, but to be honest, you've got the clan symbols there, you've got the text there, there's a World of Darkness background, really simple title, and yet 36,000 views each, and none of that was AI generated. The background is a World of Darkness piece that was on their website at the time, which I've seen people use before. The logos were actually from the White Wolf Wiki, the unofficial White Wolf Wiki, that is. I didn't know about the Storyteller's Vault at that time, and I didn't know about all these different art packs and things, and I just used those. They had a transparent background. I was like, oh, great, cool. I didn't know how much you could manipulate the colour schemes in Canva then. I just chose that, and I was able to just shift the colours with the colour slider thing, which I thought was really fucking crap. Which it is, rather than using duotone and fiddling with it there, and I just made things blue because I like the colour blue, and it's kind of this awful blue tack colour blue. But it did its job. I used that format for years of book reviews, character creation guides, the lore dives, and it worked. It got the job done. People in their thousands come to listen to what I do. Yeah, part of it is to do with the reputation that I've now built for myself. But regardless, there are people who are going to be searching up that lore who aren't subscribed to me because I have 13-ish thousand subscribers, and that's about 20,000 more. So a lot of people watched that and didn't subscribe to me, and a lot of people are going to come and watch that and subscribed to me. So you do not need something to be hyper-realistic and super detailed and actually argue for a thumbnail. That just does you a disservice. Because it sort of detracts everything to what's going on. Just a few recognisable things are just all that you fucking need. And obviously with YouTube putting one's face on there has helped a bit as well. But I'm getting a bit sidetracked here with all of this passionate ranting. Again, you don't need AI art. There are images out there that you can use from Storyteller's Vault to the Dungeons Guild and all these other different places. You could spend some money on a stock photo, and quite frankly, a lot of it is free to use. At this point, it's just laziness. You don't need it. There's no excuse now. I've ranted on enough about that it's just as it is. So, all of that out of the way, I can't really do much until start playing Improve That template, which, in their defense, they don't actually take a lot of time to do, which is actually really cool. It's quite often where I've sent something and they said, oh, it'll take 3 to 5 business days, and then they've approved it on the same day, sort of thing, which is really neat. But you don't usually have to wait long, at least from my experience anyway. And then once they've done that, I can then start planning out the sessions of when I'm going to do it. As of the recording this, it's the 11th of December 2024, the year of our Lord Talos, and I imagine that trying to organise too much just before and after the Christmas period is going to be a bit much for people. So I'm going to try and keep that in mind and be a bit free and flexible with the time period. And I've got quite a bit going on as well, which is most important here. But I suppose the main thing I can do now is set up the Discord server, which I'm going to show you in just a moment. But first, we should probably get that video out of the way.
I should probably mention that this video part is only really beneficial if you're a content creator or influencer, depending on how you address yourself, where I feel it's going to get any attention, because I think if you start doing that on Facebook groups and or Reddit forums, then it's going to probably annoy a lot of people. Now, of course, if they're your own Facebook groups and Reddit things, by all means, go ahead and do it. But for the most part, just don't bother with this stage unless you're somebody like me with someone with a semblance of following. With that out of the way, I think I should carry on and do the fucking advert now. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, or whatever time zone it is, whether you in the world, it is your Lore Saviour. And throughout 2025, which is rapidly approaching, join within a day, you'll simply be replaced, because quite frankly, I'm a busy bee, and I want to give this opportunity to as many people as I can, and if you're going to fuck about with me, I'll fuck back in good turn. So with that little innuendo out the way, sign up with the startplaying.games link, join that unique Discord server, and I'll see you in January, February as we play Wraith the Oblivion together. And until next time, farewell. And there you have it. Fairly simple stuff, really. And yes, I did have to put that fucking, urgency of signing up straight away in there. So again, I can say to people, you were warned, so don't act surprised. So yeah. But I can't put this video out yet, as of the recording of this, because I'm still waiting for Start Playing to hurry up without approving that fucking template. So whilst I wait for them to do that, so I can actually tinker about with the scheduling of this, maybe I could show you the Discord server and show you what that all looks like.
And here is the server that I've created. I've simply called it Wraith Chronicle. I should probably actually change that to the actual name of the game, so it's a bit easier to point out, because who knows how many games of Wraith these people are playing in. 9 Wraith, fuck all. So when people arrive, they're going to arrive in this general channel, I guess. You've got this recap category up here. It's not private, but nobody can post in it, so it just allows me just to break down what happens in each session so people can remember. I found that's been particularly helpful because I've played with a lot of neurodiverse players, myself included. I'm autistic, and just having that there as a reminder and not having the players do an actual recap about what happens, I think is a lot fairer and nicer and far less stressful as well. Obviously there isn't going to be a session 0 because I feel that a lot of that is going to be happening as we're talking in the general chat and also before the game starts. But let's actually have a look at a channel that I've actually put shit in. Let's work down to the next one, dice instructions. I am using the bot Dice Maiden for this because it's the most easiest to use and it's the most generic. You simply type /roll and then you get this little prompt that comes up. You put in the number of dice that you want and then it spits out the results there. And as I've said, it does not calculate the results, it simply just gives you the numbers. So in this roll here, this would garner 2 successes, presuming the difficulty was 6. If it was 5, it's now 3 successes. I've just thought that was a bit easier to do that way rather than having all the little fancy other World of Darkness specific dice for that. That's just my experience. It's just the easiest to use. You just type in one thing, type in another thing, boom, bam, it's done. And because these are the instructions, I don't want people typing in here, so this one's been made to similar to the recap where they can read it but they can't engage with it. Beyond that, they actually have a dedicated dice roll channel for that. Then we move on to this category filled with resources. I'm going to start with the handouts. And you've got the Psyche character sheet, the Shadow character sheet, and you have the Goated Wraith Compendium. Seriously, did you think that this whole motif with spooky goats was just for the shits and giggles and to make myself sound a bit relevant and down with the kids, as it were? I mean, partly, yes, but I do believe it is the greatest of all time Wraith Compendium. It expands some of the ideas of haunts, passions and fetters that I often find that new players of Wraith the Oblivion, particularly those that have been used to playing Vampire the Masquerade, particularly 5th edition, that try to compare too much to Vampire. I've seen people say, haunt is just a Wraith's haven, or passions are like convictions, no, there's a lot more emotional nuance of that. So I've provided an explanation there. You can go and get it from the Storyteller's Vault and Drive Through RPG. It's totally free to use, but if you want to, give a little money to buy it, I'd greatly appreciate that. You can find that in a link in the description below. And then I've got a little tutorial thing here where you've got basically all stuff that I've done. You've got how to play, character creation guide, and the full How to Wraith playlist, which is an expanded version essentially of the Goated Wraith Compendium and Spectres, because that's not in the compendium. That's basically it, and it's only when the players start coming through and we're chatting and exchanging ideas and whatnot, I'll be able to have a better idea how to fat out this chronicle with their ideas, their backstories and whatnot. In fact, one thing that I am going to do now that I think about it, I'm not going to make any channels for this yet, but I'm going to make a category that's player specific. So when they like send in their character sheets and backgrounds and whatnot, I can have it all in one place rather than all scattered all over about the place, so it's a bit difficult to find. And I think this being a Chronicle, I think this is rather important. So I'll add to the specific channel so only that specific player can see theirs, and so on and so forth. I could do more with this, like I could add in some music bots, but I just find that a bit annoying to deal with, and if anybody wants to listen to music or whatever whilst they do this, I'm not going to stop them either. That's not something I need to do with this. Just moved PC shiz above that, and I think this is in the order that I think most people are going to view them. Actually, I'll move that up there because resources is basically going to be seen once or twice. So we have all the game stuff together, the general stuff right at the top, and then recap above that. And actually, now that I'm looking at this, I'm going to add in calendar, so we know the different days of the sessions, and if we have to move things, which I really hope isn't the case, I can just scratch that out and provide it in their unique time zones. And as I've been editing this, I've seen the little notification pop up on my phone that Start Playing Games have now approved the template, so I can actually go ahead and start organising all of this. And I have decided to have it in the last 2 weekends of January and the first 2 in February. And the reason being for that is that it actually gives me a month to like properly plan and orchestrate like that initial first session and know how I could integrate the players' ideas and passions and whatnot. And I say could because, you know, the moment I start cementing things in properly, players are going to change their mind all the time, and it's really important as a games master, to me at least, that you don't be so rigid in your plans, especially when I've done something like this where there is like a general threadbare of a story here, and also keeping it open for player to interact with their like character specific things here, that I can't really cement too many ideas. I don't want to railroad people in such a bad way that they feel they have no agency and they don't have much impact on the world. I do want that. You know, I can't do much until I start getting this stuff through. Also, it gives them a good month, you know, to organise themselves and to make plans for their schedules and whatnot, so they can hopefully play those weeks after each other. That, and it doesn't really give them much an excuse come the day and said, well, you've had a month to do all of this, where's the fucking character sheet? You know, it's just giving myself plenty of time rather than doing what I have done in the previous and just launch straight into this and then feel a little bit pressured with it, which I enjoy to an extent, but I don't want to do it this because I want to treat this as like a proper serious Chronicle, as short as it will be. Yeah, so let's see what happens next. The first of 4 sessions are now done. Obviously you've got 3 more to go, and things went really, really well. Even with the actual build-up of the game itself, in that players signed up pretty quickly, I had the character sheets in pretty quickly as well, and there's been a lot of enthusiasm and buzz and excitement for it so far, which has obviously made me feel very happy. And in terms of other games that I've run, this has probably been the most buzzed I have seen any players of mine being for a game for, well, quite some time actually, especially as it's Wraith, because it's not as big as Vampire or Werewolf is, so that makes me feel pretty good. Also, it makes me pretty good knowing that when I was getting the different character sheets through, 3 of the 4 players were using a shadow archetype from the Wraith's Player's Guide, which is an old 1st edition book. So they went out of their way to, probably using a PDF to be fair, you know, to scour through and find those specific old archetypes, which made me realise I actually needed to add some to the upcoming Hopeful Damned homebrew. So knowing that these mostly newbie players to Wraith the Oblivion went out their way to find an older edition book so they can like really fine-tune their character was really cool to see. And as you may recall, if you've been following me on social media and paying attention to the different YouTube community posts, I actually went out my way and bought a second-hand copy of the Wraith Player's Guide because I had a PDF copy for ages, and I thought, you know what, if my players are going to be using them as well a lot, we're going to be using a book, because I just find that a lot easier to do. It's in pretty good nick as well, other than a little bend that sort of like runs up and down there, which the seller did not advertise in the slightest, but regardless, it's a very good nick. And as we're showing off books, I might as well conclude by saying that I'm also used Ends of Empire to introduce the Ferryman. There's some gifts and goodies that the Ferryman can have, which are detailed fully in Ends of Empire, which is For the most part, it's like the Apocalypse Gehenna setting for Wraith the Oblivion. You've also got the guild book for the Minori guild here as well. And there's some other surprises in there as well. You should go and check that one out. It's actually one of the more useful end times World of Darkness books, which is pretty neat indeed. Now, as for the concepts themselves, I'm going to be using what the character concepts are rather than using their names. For the one thing, I don't actually remember their names at the moment, even though I ran the game last night, so it's pretty fresh in my memory. But I think it's just a lot easier if I just use the character concepts rather than their names, in my opinion. So we have bureaucratic exhausted worker who died via car crash because they fell asleep on the wheel and they ran somebody over. If we assigned them to the different legions, because I think people are going to be curious about that, I have put them in the Silent Legion, which is like the ones who usually end up killing themselves or through some means of despair. Because this guy is exhausted, he felt he hasn't really lived his life at all. And like the bit when he's retiring is when he considers himself to like fully be, free, as it were, and start living, which is kind of sad, really. So that's why I say that I have linked that car crash and his exhaustion with those really sad emotions, which makes it really fucking morbid thing indeed. We have a former athlete turned IT guy and gamer who sort of let himself go a little bit, whose death as I've left as mysterious. I don't actually know at this time how he died. If that's something the character wants to pursue, I will conjure up something, I'm sure. But I've just sort of left it up in the air, to be honest, because I think that just provides a little bit of mystery. So they are with the Legion of Paupers, if we're going to assign a legion to them. And then you have Mr. and Mrs. Mafia, who were two gangsters who have a son who have sent them off to a place to stay near London for safekeeping, who had their heads blown up by rival gangs. So obviously this is the Grim Legion, victims of violence. And the session went pretty well, so we killed off all the characters. One of Mrs. Mafia was late, so I had to put her death, well, her resurrection, as it were, for lack of a better phrase, later into the game. So whereas everybody's bodies were near where they died, Mrs. Mafia was near an underpass, being well acquainted by a spectre. That all went really well, and there's really cool bits of roleplay going on with all of that, and like each of them having a different approach to their life. Some are more optimistic than others. Mrs. Mafia being very stoic, and the bureaucratic worker like gagging at the bit to come back to life, sort of thing, so he can, live his life. Like, this can't be the end, sort of thing. Like, no, it's all a bad dream, it's a nightmare, whatever. It's actually the gamer individual who was more thinking it was a nightmare, but he seems a bit more accepting of it. And Mr. Mafia also was able to test out his Arcanoi a bit on the different gangsters around their home and managed to scare them off before they set fire to his home to get rid of the evidence, which is particularly important because the home is a feta for this particular wraith, so that would have been particularly spicy indeed. So obviously when I get around to doing the next session, this is when the story proper is going to start. So when it ended, I gave everybody like the task to come up for something that they want to explore. It could be like trying to find out something, interacting with a passion or whatnot, or it could be something that could be dealt with really quickly via the dice roll. It really depends on what they come up with. Just so that I can feed bits of that into the actual gameplay, because I think if we just followed straight with the story, it would just end pretty quickly. That, and I also want them to explore, bits of their backstory and the things they put down on their character and whatever. So it not only pads the game out a little bit, but so they can feel that more personal connection to their characters a lot more. And on that note, all the different Wraith core books suggest this. I don't actually think Wraith the Great War suggests this, but I believe the other three do. When you're having the characters interacting with their shadows, do try and make it clear one way or another that there isn't a system or dice roll for the shadow to make themselves known, as it were, to partake in the conversation, as it were. Like using fawns and whatnot, obviously they have to like spend angst and roll dice or whatever, but to actually like speak or interact with their specific psyche, make it known either like the beginning of the session, just making it clear, just guys, remember that, blah blah blah, or do what the book suggests and just send off little private messages, which is something that I did on one occasion. I sent off a little handout that I made with Canva whenever the shadow was near, the psyche was ever near the ferryman, that it sort of quelled them into submission because they were fearful of them. And the reason why I did that is because there's a little bit of obscure lore kind of mentioned in End of Empire, but definitely mentioned in Wraith 20th's Book of Oblivion, that the shadow can't speak or really do anything in the presence of a ferryman, which is which adds to their power and their gravitas. And me legitimizing using a ferryman here on top of everything else that I've described, it's also doesn't, muddy the gameplay too much with some of the shadow interaction, because some people would argue that on your first session you should keep shadow roleplay at a minimum, or not at all, or let the storyteller do it. I'm not a fan of such advice, because if you want people to explore Wraith the Oblivion as it was intended, I'd encourage players, if they're feeling comfortable with it, to go as much or as little as they want, and as other players feel more comfortable with the system, they will naturally enter as and when need be. And because one of the players was lay, I ended up being a shadow for a little bit, and some of the other players, were more comfortable doing it than the other, and I'm sure as we continue to play, we'll get some more awesome shadow roleplay in there. And of course, with the actual story that's going to be coming up, I really hope it's going to create some interesting moral dilemmas as well. Yes, that's kind of all that I really need to report on the game as of itself at the moment. But one little thing that has caught my eye is that when they were all handing in their character sheets, all bar one of them chose the Fawn Shadow Call, where if it's in the middle of a tempest or near a nihil, they could summon the presence of spectres, which is very interesting, because it sort of pushes me in a little direction that spectres could, or perhaps should be encouraged to partake in the story a bit more, because we've already had a little bit of a tease and a little underpass. That like Spectre side route, as it were, like the secret ending of our game we put into video games terms. Maybe I could introduce that Spectre idea a bit more, so this particular underpass, there could be nihils in that area, or whenever they go through an underpass, or wherever it's somewhere that's secluded, whatnot. So it just sort of drops the ideas that these places aren't safe, and maybe the people who congregate around them aren't what they seem. Now, if I do that, I have to be careful how to do that, so the players don't catch on to this too quickly. But then again, the players themselves might be able to work out what's going on, but their characters might, and it might even be more tragic if they use dice rolls to determine that and they fail. None of them have castigate, so there's no real way of them to work out if it's a shadow or not, and they don't have any arcanoi that could suggest that either. So I'm very curious to see how this is all going to be introduced one way or another. I have some ideas about the sort of NPC to introduce, but if he comes along, I will talk about him. Yes, it's definitely a him. It's an idea that I've had for a very long time. That's now definitely it for the first of the 4 sessions of this Wraith Chronicle. I don't know what's going to be happening in the next one. Until now. So as of the recording of this, I have literally just wrapped up my game of Wraith Oblivion, dealing with the experience points. And if you know from my recap sessions of my Chicago by Night game, you know I like to do a little bit of bonus point expenditure, getting the players to vote for a different player for a particular reason as to why they should gain such a point, which encourages a lot of the role-playing aspects, particularly with Wraith, where you're sort of dealing with 2 characters, your character and the shadow of somebody else. I recommend you doing that. It's a lot of fun, and just seeing everybody just interact with the game a bit differently. That being said, we were down a player for this session, which was a little frustrating, but unlike a lot of the times when this happens with me, I actually had plenty of warning to try and manage this, so it wasn't too much of a crisis, just a little bit of inconvenience. It also does highlight one of the main flaws with running Wraith the Oblivion, is that if you have too many players that take time off, the whole game fucking falls apart because of the element that you're playing another part of somebody else's character, as it were. So that's something to keep in mind. So running huge groups of Wraith is kind of impractical, but also running small ones kind of means it falls apart pretty quickly as well. But you can always reschedule, so it's not really the end of the world here. But as it was also just one player, I could cope with this as well. But as for the session itself, I started off by focusing on these characters' passions, because as we talked about with this, we have this main story that's running through here, and I'm inserting people's fetters and passions into the main storyline. So not only do they go through the motions of the story so they can experience the elements of Wraith I want to show them, but they're also interacting with their backstory and their, motives and whatnot through the passions and fetters. For example, we had Mrs. Mafia, who travelled to London through the Midnight Express to sing lullabies to her grieving, traumatized son. There was a little bit of shadow manipulation there, or at least an attempt to do so, that makes said lullabies a bit more malevolent and traumatic still, and to add to the suffering. That was overcome pretty well, which is, it would have been interesting to see what happened if it become a bit more chaotic, but, doesn't really matter. We had another character, our bureaucratic worker, go and visit their granddaughter and just whisper, things are going to be alright, I love you sort of things, with embody and whisper, rather than keening, with a lullaby singing, I mean. And they also had a meeting with a heretic faction that I came up with called Children of the Tomb, who are a group that believe that Jesus Christ was arisen, essentially. And I have some ideas of what I want to do with that, presuming that this character wants to explore that route further, where they will attempt to jump through a hill believing that Jesus overcomes some darker parts of himself, which, if you know Wraith the Oblivion lore, part of the process of becoming a Risen is going down to the labyrinth and making a deal with your shadow. I'm also doing it like this because it's made very clear throughout the writing that nobody really knows the full steps. No one singular person, unless a Risen, knows how to become a Risen. It's all fragmented and story collecting and whatnot. So this cult, this heretic group, have heard this bit, and they have now put together their whole modus operandi around this, and I think it's particularly interesting. And of course, Children of the Tomb, Jesus Christ's body was buried in the tomb, it moved back, a bit of lyrical painting there, world building as it were. And that character is sort of weighing up, do I join this or not, or do I find my own way? And depending on what they do, I might throw in a different character, that's a bit easier, that Spectre route that I mentioned. And then we had our tech guy whose body hasn't been found yet, so it's been decaying in the apartment, who used Inhabit to enter a computer and send messages on the game that they had last played, which was obviously still on, just to let them know, hey, I'm dead, come and collect the body. And through some very successful rolls, the friends took the bait. And I used actually some ideas that were presented in the Wraith Player's Guide. It's actually one of the really cool things about this. It actually has some uses about how players can interact with computers and technology. It's something that the Artificers Guild book touches upon, but we've actually got some fucking systems in here, which makes this a really fucking cool book indeed. Lovely stuff! Obviously, once we had done that, we had the players deal with the main quest, as it were. Go and collect the bar guests, and then you'll get the haunt registered. And there was a bit of a conversation. They all kind of worked out, or at least alluded to the fact that there may be something going on between one of these bar guests and the renegade leader, but they didn't take that bar guest with them. They managed to negotiate an allegiance whilst also aligning themselves with the hierarchy, as it was. So they're trying to play both games here, which is very messy stuff, which is actually something I didn't account for. So trying to work out what happens next is going to be very interesting indeed. And also trying to work out how Mr. Mafia, who's the player who wasn't here, to integrate that into the plot as well.
This also highlights a really important point, that you shouldn't plan every single possible encounter that the players will have and railroad them in a negative sense, as it will. Because, if I had done that and I had assumed that they were going to be aligning with the hierarchy by default for whatever reason, I could be pulling my hair out right now because I wouldn't know what to do, because I've prepared myself for this one particular scenario. But the fact that I've done it in mind, knowing they're going to do something weird, knowing that they're either going to side one side or the other, but I've more or less planned what's going to be happening in the background, if they don't do a certain thing, what would happen, what makes most sense. I can now slot things around more easily and not get so upset or frustrated over these sorts of things. you know, I can just have the bar guest escape. So that's why when you're designing these one-shots or chronicles, that you don't, like, plot every single minutiae out, because in my opinion that's just silly. Just, you know, make things a little loosey-goosey, as it were. You know, like, as loose as your mother.
And the fact that I made a very deliberate slip up here with the Legionnaires saying, I will take these two bar guests back. That could have easily been a slip of the ST ton rather than an in-game thing. So I don't think they picked up on that. So we'll have to see what happens now. And I think it's going to revolve around the Renegades being a bit more pushy with this group, getting them to do things, especially when there's this other bar guest in the works. And I think that bar guest is just going to go missing, sort of thing, and thinks this group is responsible for it. And they're going to be, yeah, that's maybe what I could do with him. Have him go on a fucking wild goose chase with them to try and find this missing bar guest. And that's where that craziness and that love bit comes in as well. And I introduced another girlfriend character, something that I didn't plan with the writing. It's just when I'm ad-libbing and making shit up, that further emphasised the point that this was an ex of the renegade leader, and it's just making all these emotions very complicated. And it's caused a lot of drama and fun, and I've loved the role playing with this group. And they're really embracing it really well. Not so much shadow play with this time round, but you know what? That's okay. The shadows don't have to interact all the time, and obviously because there was a player missing, I had to step in as that person's shadow guide and attempted a bit of a Freudian slip to try and see if I can cause a bit of drama, having the bar guest escape from the renegade's clutches. But it didn't work because they had exactly two successes with the willpower roll. So maybe next time. But yeah, that's really it, and I've got to sort of work out this sort of an element to this wild goose chase. Either I conjure up something on my own, or I use help with the scene generation tables with the Hopeful Damned homebrew, or a bit of the both. Maybe I'll have some ideas or something, and then I need something filled out, so I'll use a bit here. Or, you know, you've already seen how that works. I'm just waffling at this point. So I've just wrapped up the penultimate session of this Wraith the Oblivion Chronicle, and I am very, very surprised about what these players have done with this. So to start with, we started with the player who was away in the previous session, so I could just focus a bit more about what they were doing, and they wanted to spend some time with their passion. But because they didn't exactly interact with their passion in the way that it's written out, they didn't actually gain any pathos back with it. But the characters themselves felt fulfilled in all the same way, you know, that they wanted to see and just watch their son interact with the life, you know, just, you know, play with toys and whatnot. And that's just what that character needed. So they didn't really push about gaining pathos back, and neither did I, which I think is a very beautiful bit of roleplay. It's very simple and minimalistic, as it were, and similar with the last session where I described it for the first player that went down to London. You know, describing London and the Wraiths and the whole Midnight Express and all those different elements in a similar but different way, partly because I didn't write my description down, and also I'm aware that that character observes things in a different way as well. Now, where this also differed is that I then introduced the idea of a maelstrom, and they didn't do all too well with rolls. They took a bit of damage with debris being flying about. They saw spectres rise out the ground, and I decided if they were, you know, failed one particular roll at the end, they were going to take some damage with the maelstrom damage with a lot of D10 aggravated damage. And they had a conversation with a Reaper who was kind enough, you know, to save people into this haunt, but not so nice to control his temper, because he was particularly rude, loud, and very impatient, which is kind of the whole thing with Wraith, I guess. You know, you sort of detach yourself a lot more from humanity that the longer time passes on, sort of thing. And as I said, these saw Wraith spectres rise from these pits in the ground, these nihils, Wraiths completely be obliterated by lightning. I really amped up the violent nature of the maelstrom here, and the chaotic energy of it all, and how London, from my perspective within Wraith's World of Darkness, just how fucking manic it all is, and just adding my own little spins of it as well, because I am British in it and I do know London enough to, you know, populate it with some of those interesting characters as it were. So when that Wraith came back, like a whole day and a bit later, they met up with their circle, seeing these Legionnaires leave with the bar guests, the two of them. And there was a bit of a conversation about what they missed and whatnot. And this is where I thought things deviated, where I thought they were going to align more so with the Renegades a bit more, like stand up against the man, because it was kind of going in that way, trying to play off against the hierarchy a little bit. But with everything that had happened, to the majority of the circle realising the Renegades didn't quite have it all together, and the Storms and Spectres and whatnot, they kind of had this moment like, we're fucked. Like, we can't look after ourselves properly. The Renegades aren't going to do much good, so we should probably actually go and see if we can learn more about the hierarchy from the hierarchy themselves, you know. I thought that was a really interesting idea, and this completely threw me off guard. Like, I love the fact that when I design these games, I'm open like this and I know how things are going to play out, because it lets the players drive the story forward if I just have those little snippets there, which is why when we designed the game earlier on in this video, we were designing like the main threads of the story rather than the road that we're going to go down on. And I've said this already, but this just shows this beautifully, because it now also pushes me as the storyteller to think, right, oh shit, let's throw in some characters really quickly. What sort of personalities are they going to be? What's the role of these different characters? They spoke some guards who who were the more enforcers, who know a little bit. They had a chat with an Anacreon, who was like this old guy who like a bobbly head, like a bobblehead thing, an accessory, who had like could spin round on his feet, like his feet were about balls. Who had like 10 fingers on each hand. It was described a lot like a Winston Churchill sort of character, which had its perks and flaws, of course, you know, knowing what we know about Winston fucking Churchill. But yeah, they found him a really engaging character, and then I remembered that I actually needed to get the Legion of Paupers back involved, so I brought back a familiar character who was going to escort them to a more influential figure within the Legion of Paupers, and this is where I revealed the whole spy element of this. I felt that I did a good job like describing that, but I'm not too sure how well that came across. I didn't discuss it all that much. Maybe they will do in the next session, but it's quite clear that there's been a bit of a game that's been played here, as it were. And this representative of the Legion of Paupers wants a bit more of a stronger foothold in the Necropoli, and has promised the players of what they wanted, you know, protection and power and responsibility, and not take orders so much, which of course will just come down to you've got your foot through the door a bit more, but you're still going to be doing a lot of, you know, busy work, as it were. So when we go on to the last session, it's going to be that meeting with the renegade leader who's going to bring them to this neutral ground, and there's going to be this conversation. And as we've already ascertained in this video and also in the game, this whole love relationship sort of thing, and given what the players know about this girlfriend of the leader of the Renegades, that is going to create some very spicy drama indeed. And I have no fucking clue where this is going to go, to be honest, because I had, like with this one, I kind of thought, right, if they don't follow through some ideas and not combat, Spectres, we've already introduced there's a storm coming, and that's actually a pro tip I'm actually going to recommend to any games master. If you've got no fucking clue what to do with your players and they're out in the open, whatever, just throw some fucking combat at them and just let them pick up the pieces, because it gives them something to do, and then afterwards it thinks, right, why the fuck has this happened? How does this connect to the main story? And then they can come up with their own conclusions, and then you can pull and push all of these different fucking elements. So yeah, pro games master tip from your Lore Saviour. So yeah, that kind of leads me on to the fourth and final session. It seems kind of weird it's all wrapping up so quickly. And as of this recording this particular segment, I've got no fucking clue how they're going to deal with things, but I do know how the rest of the story is going to unfold. And there we have it, the final session of this Wraith the Oblivion Chronicle, which means this is actually the first Chronicle that I have finished all the way through. Huzzah! And it was with Wraith the Oblivion, not Vampire the Masquerade. But enough about my ego wanking, let's talk about the session proper. Yeah, the players went to go and investigate to see where this renegade gang had gone to, because they went to the place and they couldn't find them, and then they got ambushed by Spectres. I couldn't help myself but bring in that Mr. Teeth character that I mentioned earlier on. I just thought it was a wonderful opportunity talking about this storm that was coming along, you know, coming in from London, and it just sort of bubbled through Spectres. And of course, when this Nihil opened up, everybody's Shadow who had Shadow Call, which is everybody bar one, used Shadow Call. So this Spectre, Mr. Teeth, summons 4 Spectre friends, and then on top of that we had an additional 6. So that was 11 Spectres all at once, which led to a very chaotic encounter where everybody was sort of running away. One player did a bad roll, I think they botched, or they got like 1 success or whatever, and they were nearly bitten in a very sensitive area by a Spectre with some very impressive teeth, who wasn't Mr. Teeth, doing a whole like exorcist crawl thing on their hands and legs. And Mr. Teeth himself used the Spectre artifact, the Maggot Revolver. I fucking love that weapon. That actually fired its way into one of the circle, went back to rescue their friend, and it did quite a bit of damage, and it nearly killed them. But they used Paphos in the following scene to heal themselves up, and they barely managed to get away from the Spectres as they sort of went ahead into the Necropoli and do their thing. And before all of that, I forgot to mention, they went back to their haunts to see what that box in a wooden, that was like under the floor, like floorboard sort of thing, and the party member that had Outrage was able to use it to remove the box from the floor and hold the dagger that was inside for a little bit, and they never found out what was inside, what that dagger was for. I was expecting them to go and investigate that a little bit, but hey, they didn't. And I know what that dagger's for, and they're never going to know, and neither are you. Well, I might run the game again, and we may have that as like a location for people to visit, but that can be a bit of forbidden knowledge for a different time. Perhaps, maybe. Who knows? So going back to the action, they then went inside this flat, which is serving as a haunt for the rest of this gang, and the group was able to persuade the Renegade gang to head their way down into the rendezvous point where the climax of the Chronicle happened. Now, as part of that, we had this Wraith who, as I mentioned previously, who was a bit possessive, as it were. The fact that they know that their partner and gang leader is still having strong feelings to this bar guest, and the group tried to like talk to her as she was like having this moment of realization where she wasn't really loved all that much, or as much as the other one. They didn't do quite as well a job because I decided it was her who was going to be succumbed and become a Spectre, only we didn't get that far as such. I thought it was far more potent to have the whole self-afflicted harrowing where she was just sucked into the ground sort of thing, and that kind of spooked everyone. I could see with their faces and their reactions, just like that just completely fucking threw them. So whilst we haven't done a harrowing within the group as such, we came very close though with that player was nearly killed by Maggot Revolver, but we did experience it like a harrowing adjacent, and somebody kind of explained it to them, explaining that they didn't exactly know what was going on, highlighting the youngness and the inexperience of the renegades there, which kind of, you know, it made everybody feel a bit sad, you know, that was the fate, you know. And they used that talking to the renegade leader at the end, like to give himself up, like you've lost, like you're blaming everyone by yourself sort of thing. And of course he got the bar guest back, but with the use of a Molliate's spiked thumb through the neck sort of thing. They got it back, but not alive sort of thing. I think it would probably take a lot more than that to kill a bar guest anyway, but you know, it makes a lot of narrative sense. But that's what the players wanted. They, you know, sided with the hierarchy, and they fit quite nicely into that role, like choosing that for their own safety and security really, and they have a bit more status in the hierarchy now. And we had a bit of an epilogue afterwards. Everybody was talking about what they wanted to do. The player who that was debating joining the heretics didn't. The player who died under mysterious circumstances wanted to find out what happened to his body more and how he actually died. Again, I know how that happened, but you probably won't ever find out how that happened now. And then these two players who were a couple, they worked together to try and take down the one that killed them, because it's part of an initiation process with the Grim Legion. You sort of meet the Smiling Lord who gives you permission to go and kill the one who killed you sort of thing. So a very legal means of breaking the codes of Charon, however that's pronounced. And of course they'd be having their haunt as well. And, you know, they'd be working together like a typical 9-to-5 job, as somebody described it. So, in some sense, they had a lot more safety now, but in other senses, they don't actually have a lot, because they still go back to that same crubby haunt, and they're being pushed around and doing a lot more, so. But it's cool that they all thought about and had a clear idea of what they wanted to do with their characters, and most importantly, everybody had a really fun time doing it, which is amazing for people who haven't, for most of the players, hadn't had a lot of experience with Wraith the Oblivion. They just sort of sunk into that role very well. Shadow guiding was very appropriate, and really I've got nothing really to complain about, really. I kind of regret actually making it only 4 sessions. Could have been cool to stretch that out, but you know what? Sometimes it's nice just to have things short and sweet, just so you can now think about, what happened next and just reflect on those short memories without being lost and absorbed in all those years upon years of sessions, maybe, just to put it in slight D&D terms for a moment. Yeah, that concludes the 4th session, and now, in it, mate. So let's actually go through and talk about what we've achieved in just under 2 hours. We've talked about getting players and games masters who can run/play your game of Wraith the Oblivion, whether it's 1st, 2nd, 20th anniversary edition, or Wraith the Great War. We've talked about Session 0, we've talked about the different types of Chronicles that you can and potentially should run, especially if this is your first game of Wraith the Oblivion. We've put together a little Discord server so you can actually do this in a digital space, and all the different ways you can give handouts and whatnot for a really bare bones basic experience without having to learn things like Roll20 or Foundry or the rest of it. We've of course put together an actual Chronicle using the Hopeful Damned homebrew, using scene generation tables to provide 2-word prompts to provide an entire Chronicle. A 4-part Chronicle for 4 people who have never played Wraith the Oblivion together before, and most of which didn't actually have all that much experience with Wraith the Oblivion, and they all had fun. They got into the shadow guiding, they got into the role playing, and they had some really cool moments together, and everyone had a really fun time and were appropriately spooked and emotionally moved throughout. It was generally a lot of fun, and this just goes to prove, really, in this sort of vlog, documentary, video experiment thing, that it is possible for you to run a game of Wraith the Oblivion with strangers online, because something I hear quite a lot of is like, oh, I could never get this to work with my friend group or whatever, I would only ever run this with my friends, but blah blah blah. You don't have to. You can run a game of Wraith the Oblivion with strangers online. I have shown you it's possible to do that now, and it's really straightforward to do either. So, in the nicest sense, stop making excuses for yourself. Go out there and find some people to play with. There's loads of Discords and Reddits and Facebook groups, that you could ask and advertise to, and get people together and experience this wonderful game within the world of darkness. Just do it. Go and have fun and experience this game. And you've all now seen how really straightforward and easy that it is. All you need is just basically a variety of words, 2-word prompt sort of things, and an expansive imagination, and I think most games masters have that under their belt. So yeah, go out there and advertise that game, which I've also shown you how to do now, so there's really no excuse at this point. It's just you with this big, mental block, as it were. Just go out there and have fun. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I really would like to make more of these in the future. I actually really want to make one regarding Wraith the Great War. Now, of course, most of what I said here will obviously apply to that specific game line, but there are some things that do need to be taken to consideration, like some very specific things, so I think you can understand how that may be a little different from standard Wraith the Oblivion fare. But would you like to see that? Would you like to not only see how I would run a game of Wraith the Great War, actually using that book as a game book rather than a source book for 20th Anniversary Edition? Is that something that you'd be interested in seeing and playing with your Lore Saviour here? What other World of Darkness games would you be interested in me teaching you like this? Vampire? Werewolf? Let me know in the comments below, and things that you would like to see more of if you want to see more of these sorts of videos in the future. Now, whilst you're down there, be more than welcome to purchase any of the Wraith the Oblivion source books and core books down there for you to include in your games. Now, if you purchase them with those specific links, I get some of the money back, so I can actually provide videos like this, so I can read the material, learn the material, and, play and run it with you lovely bastards. But I understand that books ain't cheap, and we're in some very, very difficult times right now, thanks to certain people in the US of A. But if you can, that's absolutely fantastic, and support your favourite independent content creator, your Lore Saviour. But if you can't, that's absolutely fine. But what you can do instead is like, share and subscribe to the Lore by Night channel. Check out the various videos that have been floating around my head to have more Wraith the Oblivion in your life, and I'll see you on the next upload, whatever that may well be for you. And until next time, farewell.